May I now call upon stage for our last panel discussion of the day, focus on net zero, Dr. Ravindra Udgikar, Vice President Corporate Strategy and Marketing, Praj Industries Limited. He will be joined on the stage by Ms. Preeta Mishra, Senior Director, Credibility and Business Insights Group, ESG and SME, Dun & Bradstreet. Ms. Tejashree Joshi, GM Environment and Sustainability, Godrej and Boyce, and Mr. Venkatesh R, Managing Director, CII India Private Limited.
Good afternoon, or already it's evening time, I guess, and we are a little bit running out of time. Since the morning, there has been numerous discussions on the topic of sustainability, and there is a good news of coming in last panel, and there is bad news. The good news is lot of discussions, deliberations have already happened, and therefore our job is easy. The bad news is to hold the audience interest just as much as it was at the beginning. But nevertheless, I think the panel discussion today is based on focus on net zero. And there perhaps cannot be any discussion today that cannot complete without the net zero. And before we dive deep into that discussion, let's quickly reflect. So the watershed moment came in 2015 at COP21 Paris Climate Change Summit, when it was agreed by 193 nations that to stop the dire consequences of climate change, we need to curb the global temperature rise from pre-industrial levels no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And today we are already, the Earth is already 1.1 degrees centigrade warmer than 1800 levels. And what was corroborated in COP21 summit is the nationally determined contributions by each nation to reduce the emissions so that the collective goal of not hitting the 1.5 degrees centigrade target can be achieved. What has unfortunately happened is that we are not doing as well as we should have been doing. And if all nations were to contribute to the nationally determined contribution, we would still end up at 1.7 degrees centigrade. Which means we have a SOS situation to take as far as cutting down the emissions is concerned. And that is why in the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Race to Zero campaign was kicked off. And as per the Paris Climate Change Summit, by 2030, we as a globe have to cut down the emissions by 45%, and by 2050, 100%. So we become kind of zero emission nation. Since then, several nations have committed to net zero targets. India has committed to 2070, China has committed to 2060, US has committed to 2050. Many global conglomerates have committed to net zero targets. But how well are we doing? What are the ways of achieving that target? This morning, Prime Minister was addressing nation, and he said that to achieve green growth, he spelled out, or he reiterated, three-pronged formula. One is stepping up renewables. Second is reducing reliance on fossil fuels, and third is moving to gas-based economy. Now, there are a number of things there are a number of ways to reach the destination. Which destination is best suited to which nation is a path for everyone to carve out. What we as good corporate citizens, good individuals can do is actually to follow the path that has been well laid out. In this panel today, we have a excellent mix of someone from Wardzilla who is looking at the project business and large capital equipment business, Venkatesh. We have Tejashree from Godrej and Boyce, actually involved in consumer durable, engineering durables. And we have someone, Preeta, who is from the advisory body, looking at MSMEs very closely. Because, you know, about 30% of India's GDP comes from MSMEs, and over 50% of our employment actually is in MSMEs. To say that we will achieve net zero without MSMEs is not possible. Something that also can be said true about the rural India. So we have to not only limit our discussion of net zero only to the urban or industrial space, but also include villages in it. So to start with, I would request Venkatesh to quickly give a 2-minute opening remark about himself and opening comments really quickly, and then perhaps we can go around and then we can start with the Q&A, with the next set.
Thank you, moderator Ravindra ji, for good introduction, and good evening, all of you. Yeah, yes. It's a privilege for me to be here in this panel, joining in this important topic, net zero, which is important for all of us here around. And I'm coming from Vatsila, a company which is 180 years young in the country for last 40 plus years. And we are into energy and marine. And we have a manufacturing footprint in India, very close to Mumbai, for around 100 kilometers from here in Kopoli, where we also make products out here for Indian business as well as for global business. So we are in this journey of net zero, and our vision is to enable the decarbonization journey for our customers. And there we help them in transitioning through energy transition, also energy efficiency, renewable energy, all these new perspectives which are there on the anvil. So that's a short introduction, and I will give it to Tejasvi.
Tejasvi, if you may.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tejasvi Joshi. I head the environmental sustainability function at Godrej & Boyce. This year, we actually complete 125 years. So it's a group which has transitioned and seen over a century of existence. But I'm very proud and happy to say that sustainability has always been a theme based on which the business has happened. It's been identified as one of the values by the group as well as the parent, the holding company, not so long ago, Godrej & Boyce. And being a diverse group, the same set of philosophy and transition is expected from each business, which is part of the entire group. We have had come a certain way on this journey. While as a philanthropic intent, it has always been part of the DNA, a very specific strategic approach to sustainability has been a decade old now. And we have transitioned and seen 10 years of transition on this. We have experienced the challenges, we have seen the opportunities. We have also been first movers in a lot of areas in terms of driving sustainability and developing the ecosystem on this. What we have also attempted is basically to take the whole concept, not make it limited to our own operations or our own areas of influence, but take it to the consumers, basically by categorizing our products as sustainable products. And that's where I think is the mainstreaming of sustainability with business has been the thought when we actually started in 2010. And I think I'll speak more
in the course
about
of discussion. Okay, the company I represent is Praj Industries, which is India's leading industrial biotechnology company. Our company's whole mission is on accelerating energy transition through bioeconomy. So we have lots of sustainable solutions using the bioenergy, deploying the circular bioeconomy, and in the process help minimize the carbon emissions either by decarbonizing the transportation sector or either circulating carbon through the sustainable raw materials and chemicals coming from biological route. I'm going to talk a little bit more in the course of our discussion, but Preeta, up to you.
Thank you. I think it's really nice to see that the companies here on my right-hand side are more than a century old. And we are talking about sustainability. So, you know, these companies are sustainable. I come from Dun & Bradstreet. It is the largest commercial database company in the world. We are 180 years old. And we have had 4 US presidents work for us. So that's a great pride for us. We launched our ESG services in India, you know, last year. We've been working on ESG, building up the data for the last 5 years. And our focus, of course, we're working with the large and, mid companies, but mainly the small and micro. So we know how difficult it is to build up the data on ESG globally. It is a challenging issue, and we're all talking about net zero, and we'll come to that. But this is the future. you know, as we look at companies, SMEs across, I think this is the future.
Okay, brilliant. If you look at the climate calamities or climate disaster in the last 2 decades and compare them with the previous 2 decades, there is a significant rise in climate calamities, economic disasters, loss of human lives. And most of this can be traced to the climate change and inadequate climate actions. One of the drivers for climate change is the emissions that is resulting from the energy. So the power sector is at the heart of making the climate actions happen. And Venkatesh, someone who is in the thick of power sector and also heavy engineering business, project business, heavy capital goods business, how do you look at all this net zero campaign in relevance of your industry sector, please?
Wonderful question. You really brought the perspectives into the question here, and this is very important to understand. We are in a phase of energy transition, if you would see. Transition means it's a journey which we have embarked on, and journey doesn't come with 2 month, 1 quarter, 2 quarter type of thing. We have seen our journey on renewables have started 10 to 15 years back, and the growth which we are seeing in the last 2 years has been substantial compared to the previous 10 years, I would say. The renewables which is getting added to the ecosystem, which is an important element, which will actually drive the coming 10, 20, 30 years, is adding up in terms of 20 times, 30 times what we used to do last years. Yeah. This is very important in the transition when we are building up, whether be it energy or in the marine. You know, when I talk about energy or marine, stationary or moving, it's a very important aspect. And there we need to pick up a 5-pronged strategy on this energy transition when we are bringing in. Adding renewables is very important, and that we are doing. Yeah. Is it enough? Nothing is enough. We need to do more. And in the coming 7-8 years, we have an ambitious target of adding close to 500 gigawatt to our ecosystem, non-fossil fuel sources of energy, which is very important. By doing so, together with that, we also need to increase the flexibility of the solution. Flexibility, when I mean these intermittent solutions, which are renewables, are intermittent. They are not always available. So how do we bring in the perspective of what if not there? Yeah. There we need to bring in the different solutions which are there available. There we need to look at flexibility as an important element there. Fossil fuels need to phase out, but that needs to be replaced with future fuels, which are good levels of discussions have happened already in the previous forums. You see the future fuels like hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, different types of biogas and related fuels will come into play. Are they already there? No, they are not there. But the next 2 to 3 years is very important in this journey of next 2 decades for us to be effectively guiding it, spending efforts on that to guide the directions, and then going towards there. And then in this transition, you also heard Ravindra ji mentioning about our PM's engagement of gas as an enabler here. Gas will come in the transition, but has to move towards future fuels when they are readily available, when they are available with an ecosystem. And then we have to phase out the fossil fuels out from the system. That will help us towards our net zero direction. It doesn't mean that it becomes totally net zero. We have to balance this out, and net becomes zero, not everything becoming zero. We also heard it in the morning session also. It's a very important aspect to understand. There will be plus and minuses, and we have to make that net zero as an enabler here. And there we have to work together in the ecosystem. So there it is not any individual's responsibility, any individual company's responsibility. It is not state's responsibility. It is not nation's responsibility. It is together responsibility of all of us to bring that journey forward, to spend the right sources of efforts in bringing up these technologies, and also put efforts in building up these towards the sustainable solutions which will help us towards net zero. So from that perspective, when I look at it, there are also phases which we will have to cover it, and there the phases will play also a major role. Yeah. 6 months to 2 years will be an important phase where we have to work together in creating these policies, frameworks, which will help us to go the next 2 decades. I would
Wonderful.
Leave it at
so I think that's nice. I heard you say that we need to play all-inclusive game, which is so true. We need to move to a gas-based economy is what Prime Minister said, and when he says gas-based economy, it necessarily doesn't mean compressed natural gas, but also compressed biogas, which is harnessing and leveraging the captive source of energy that is within India. Coming to you, Tejasri, you know, India has more than 50% of renewable energy capacity installed. But when it comes to generation, even today, about 70% still comes from fossil fuel resources. Talking about manufacturing sector, and you know, Government of India has a lot of focus on developing the manufacturing sector. We all are aware, Make in India campaign, production-linked incentive campaign. So there is a big thrust for manufacturing in the India growth story. You represent manufacturing sector, so how do you see manufacturing sector making this tightrope walk of achieving growth at the same time not mindlessly consuming energy which could in turn take us on a climate disaster path?
Yeah, I think it is very important to look at the context of every industry.
Sure.
Manufacturing per se, if you see, and then when you talk about, say, net zero and how does the manufacturing sector approach net zero, I want to bring in a perspective which probably has been missed out in the entire net zero discussion. It's not only energy or carbon net zero that we should be looking at.
Yes.
There are basically 4 indicators on environment which actually has to have an equal focus when we are looking at a net zero journey for any company or any state or organization. And while we talk about carbon and energy being linked to carbon, of course, carbon is much wider, where we also talk about scope 3, so on and so forth. Let's not miss out on water and waste as 2 very important indicators when we are actually speaking about net zero. And all these 3 are interlinked.
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is we are today talking about circularity, but circularity essentially means resource efficiency and looking at every material which is coming out from our processes as resource, and finding out ways in terms of how do we channelize it back into business, either within the fence or beyond with partners, so that the whole impact on extraction of virgin materials reduces.
Correct.
You know, a lot of what are hard to abate sectors are basically who are largely on extraction,
Yes.
which are extractive sectors, which are supplying energy for these sectors.
Yes.
And these are basically what we talk about and have a focus.
Yeah.
But for these industries to operate, there are a lot of small scale industries, there are a lot of component suppliers who form the manufacturing base.
Yes.
So bringing in resource efficiency in terms of circularity is a very important indicator which is also going to impact the whole game of energy and carbon. The other aspect when we talk about waste is responsible handling in terms of how do we enable responsible handling of waste and take ownership of waste even when it is going beyond our fence as a part of a product. And that's where we talk about, producer's responsibility. Now, what it drives also, specifically waste, is contaminating of your water sources.
Yes.
You know, and the whole energy required to make those water sources back potable or usable is another impact that we are talking about in terms of the whole circularity or rather, the net zero game. So I think let's not lose focus on the other 2 important indicators. Also, industries are also now, progressive industries are looking at going just beyond these 3 up to their impact through their value chain on biodiversity. Because ultimately all these resources and ecosystem services are channelized through biodiversity and conservation, and I think that's where we need to really go ahead to focus on taking the responsibility up to that extent. But at the moment, when we talk about net zero, essentially at least 3 of the 4 indicators that you're talking about as carbon, energy, water and waste should be in focus.
So, perfect. I think that's a very comprehensive answer, Tejasri. So, you said reduce, recycle, reuse, replenish, the classical mantra of R.A.I.S.E need to bring in play. Then the manufacturing sector can make that tightrope walk happen. Coming to you, Preeta, nothing can be complete without MSME's engagement. And you've been seeing MSME play a big role in not only India's economic growth, but also building an entire ecosystem of suppliers. So how do MSMEs actually fit into this net zero equation? Is it overkill for them in terms of time, resource, investment, knowledge, and so on. How can we play inclusive game? We say it's a team sport.
Right. So how many of in this audience are MSMEs? Can you raise up your hands? That's only one. Okay, all of you, how many of, two? How many of you are more than 500 crores? Wow, okay, so all of you know about net zero. So the mix is different. So whenever sort of I speak at an MSME event, you have MSME. So the show of hands is more, and then if I ask about ESG, there'll be maybe one person who raises the hand, right? And net zero, MSMEs don't know about net zero. And honestly, when we talk to our customers and MSMEs, whether we like it or dislike, you know, we keep hearing data that the emissions, 60–70% of the emissions lies in the supply chain, right, with the MSMEs. Without tackling that, we are not going to become net zero. So this is a realization that's not for the MSMEs only. It's for the companies, the large companies, the government, everyone. We need to realize that we are not going to become a net zero economy 2070, whatever targets that we set for ourselves, without the MSME being involved in it. It needs to be sustainable, and they should be able to do it. And of course, they need you know, help to do it. So the first thing that we see is honestly awareness. There is truly lack of awareness. We can discuss later whether it is going to be a carrot, a reward, or a stick. Those are different philosophies, and government and companies take different, you know, I should say, steps based on the journey that they are in. But the biggest thing currently right now, if you look at it, is skill sets. So look at the team out here, right? We have managing directors, we have sustainability heads. If we talk to a person who's a business development head or an HR head, how many of them know about sustainability, even in a large organization? They may not relate it to sustainability. They may be doing things which is related to ESG. So I think one of the fundamental things that we need to do in our country is to create the awareness. And there I think yes, all of us, you know, especially the large companies here, all of you, I think, play a very important role. And then comes net zero, right? And I think for net zero or for ESG, one thing that works for all of us as human is that what will I get? What will I get? I have to incur the cost. What will I get in return? And I think we can have that in the second round, but I truly believe it's a great opportunity. Every disaster throws up opportunities. So we should, ESG or sustainability, whatever we are looking at, is a great opportunity for MSMEs. It's about how well prepared we are to take it on. Of course, there'll be cost involved, but there are different stakeholders involved. And, you know, with SIDBI, we are, in fact, the launch is tomorrow. We have an index that we are launching, which is called the Sustainability Perception Index for the MSMEs. Right. We are looking at awareness, willingness, and implementation, right? And I think I'll cover it later.
So what you are basically saying is MSMEs are not aware at this point in time, but there is willingness to participate into this, but it's a two-way street. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the next round, Venkatesh, I'll go to you. And today, no discussion is complete without the tech word in it, right? Every day you read newspaper and you watch the digital technology take newer strides. The Internet of Things, the data sciences, you know, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, you name it. So clearly, without harnessing the technology advancements, we will never be able to accelerate the journey for growth. And that also includes our net zero progression. How do you see the role of technology as a whole, and not just digital technology, into making net zero happen?
Very, very important point you raised here. When we see, I just wanted also to highlight this. It's not just digital. Digital is a very important enabler. And that's a very key, essential element in all our technological advantages. Technological advantages includes also a lot of effort spent on R&D, which you all know we are slightly weak in. India as a country is slightly weaker in that. Our universities and premier institutes like IITs may be spending some efforts, but when you compare with international universities, international bodies which are there spending their efforts on R&D, it's very, very minuscule. What we need to do in this particular journey is also importantly lift up this and bring in that R&D efforts more also in our country to happen, because the effort which we will put in there will bring us also leapfrog benefits in the coming years. So when I discuss that, we have also a backbone of European R&D centers which are helping us to bring in these. And what I have seen is that in the recent 2 years, when we were discussing with also ministries and also key stakeholders, industry stakeholders, there is a very good willingness to be grabbing these and bringing it towards us. And that is very important in this journey. So as I talk about, a lot of efforts are being put on future fuels developments. For example, I can tell that in Europe, there is already a test cell which is looking at hydrogen deployment towards 75 to 100% running on it. Today we are talking about 2% mixture in the gas. We have to go towards 10%, 25%, towards the 75 and 100%. How fast can it happen? It's more on us, how fast we can grow, grab these. At least in the next 2 to 3 years, we should move on this trajectory and bring in these more towards our country. And there we have good support also through various EU, India collaborations. The trade agreements which we are signing, you would have seen also last 2 years how many trade agreements we have signed, and that's also bringing up this perspective here. Just to give you a perspective also, data is very important here. Everything runs behind data, and if we have data, that becomes a power for us to also forecast, to also guide the future. So digital advances are very important, and we have now connectivity as an enabler here in India. You would have heard, all would know about the UPI payment system, which India is a pioneer. And that's driving one dimension, banking, financial institutions, that direction. But that's also bringing a bigger perspective on our transition journey. So this type of power we need to bring in also towards this net zero and all the other directions where we are working on. So bringing future fuels, bringing the data and technology, 5G, we are pioneers again. A lot of industry labs are being set up together with US and EU, where our teams are front running it. So in this transition, it's a very important element also to bring these advances, which will help us to bridge this gap. So advantages is very important.
So the harnessing technology is like an imperative, and you can't do without, is what you are saying.
Exactly.
Only thing is how we can accelerate innovation to commercialization. It's something which we need to focus on, right?
Correct. Indeed. Indeed.
So Tejasri, we are just, I can see the clock ticking, but I have to ask you these two questions. One is, you've been a regular at so many sustainability forums, and you've been following this very closely. We often see that the pledges are taken of net zero, whether it is at national level, whether it is at individual level, corporate level, targets are being set. Is there a mechanism by which we can monitor these pledges, whether they are just announcements or are they getting real? Are there any matrices? And quickly, if you can tell us about any metrics that can be used to follow this.
So I think probably we do not have a worldwide standardization matrices in terms of monitoring. There are all more of a voluntary based matrices, but there are reference matrices. It's not that it's not there.
Incidentally, they have taken some initiative to set up a global standard to monitor and track the progress of NDCs. So it's coming.
Yeah. So while there are NDCs, companies have been adapting, more of a disclosure kind of mechanism in terms of building stakeholder confidence in terms of what they are stating as a journey on, net zero or whatever sustainability goals. But I think so far what we had seen was companies were taking more of a kind of short-term to mid-term goals in terms of what are their targets on reduction of resource use, energy use, water use, so on and so forth. While now we are talking about net zero, which is kind of a very far off kind of goal, 2050. I don't know in this gathering how many people would be even alive to see 2050 and the net zero happening. So the more better way of, while yes, we need to have a vision on 2050, and corporations need to make it more faster than the state's declaration of 2070. We have to accelerate, because these are the growth engines and they need to accelerate the net zero transition. But it essentially has to be backed with a very solid, visible plan of transition.
Wonderful, yeah.
Where it is backed with the known technology.
And it's in public domain for people to see the progress.
Yes, yes. And see, today you will see a lot of transition plans banking on certain technologies to come in and then the corporations adopting that and moving ahead. What it also needs to be substantiated is with the current technology that we have, what is the transition looking like? Then it becomes more substantiated, then it becomes more believable for stakeholders and also your maybe your investors as well as people.
Then it becomes more credible too.
More credible and builds more confidence that it's not only a declaration or something
Announcements
that
alone.
announcement. Yeah. And as far as your other point was on
there was the policy that needs
on the
to
policy,
kick in.
yeah. See, there are like if I'm talking about manufacturing sector, when you look at the whole manufacturing bit, there are still comprehensions whether alone a manufacturing sector can transition to net zero unless it is backed by a transition with aligned sectors.
Absolutely.
Like a power sector has to transition along with the manufacturing to enable it to transition to net zero, so has the transportation sector,
So
the building sector.
It's a team sport.
It's a team sport. There is a red thread which runs across sectors which need to be backed by similar kind of policies from the government which will together transition all these sectors towards this path if we are intending to be net zero by 2070 as a country.
Yeah.
Unless that happens or some sector gets left behind, the whole transition bit may be prolonged and will not see the results that we are envisaging.
I think that's
in
a
this
great
transition.
insight. It's a team sport. We are all, the goals are interwoven. One can't achieve without another. Quickly, I want to cite one example that the company that I represent, R.A.I.S.E Industries, took one village called Mandede in outskirts of Pune, and we have a project to make that village net zero by deploying all the sustainable technologies that we have, because we believe that without villages joining the race, we can't ever achieve our nationally determined contribution. So indeed, it's a team sport. We need to come together. Talking about team sport, again, MSME is part of the value chain of any company, as a supplier, as a partner, as a service provider. And you made a pitch in the opening statement that, they need to be handheld, they need to be trained. Just how can we bring them on the front burner? Just what are the actions needed, if you can quickly tell us?
So I think Tejashree rightly said, right? It is, she talking about any industry, allied industry, I think creating the right ecosystem. I think the first thing is that who are the important stakeholders? The first is the larger corporates. I think they need to look at it closely.
Sure.
There is the government. There is the banks. Financing is extremely critical. We are talking about transitioning from traditional to renewable energy. There needs to be transition financing. And I know that the banks are very strongly thinking about it. If you look at COPs 27, they've all talked about transition financing in a big way. And in the previous session, Mr. Banerjee mentioned about what, a few $1 trillion, $100 billion, $1 trillion coming in. Even if a small 20% of that comes, how are we going to get it and how are we going to distribute it? Where will the money go? The money will go to the SMEs, right? Ultimately, through all these multilateral agencies, I know the banks are working towards, funding green products. I'm sure that banks will begin to have targets saying that like they have a priority sector. How much are you lending towards building towards, working towards a greener portfolio? So I think we can see all of that happen. And the last stakeholder is the SME themselves. This is not CSR. This is our own growth. So I think it's a question of everybody working together. We have to put our stakes in along with everybody else and sort of take it forward.
Wonderful. So, we can't do it without them. We have to take them along with us. We have to make sure that our goals are intertwined with MSME goals. I think there are lots of companies who actually take efforts in greening their supply chain. They actually take a certification program. They institutionalize the best practices. They provide the funding mechanisms. They give an opportunity for a level playing field. Not MSMEs are even aware of the incentives that are being made available for them to embark on the path of ESG. But I think we are running out of time. Venkatesh, quickly from each panelist, 3-line closing remarks so that we have time to take a couple of questions from the audience. Just 3 lines. Maybe.
Thank you. Thank you again. As I indicated, to conclude, what we need on this energy transition and moving towards, we need a good step plan, and we have done a lot of studies, modeling studies at different country levels, and also we have picked up some state level studies also, and some conglomerate study also. What we have seen is that we need different ecosystems in the energy or in the sector what we are talking about. And these ecosystems have to be planned properly and they work together in the right mix And what we have seen is that for a country like India, if we would embark on this journey of renewables together with the future fuels and also adding up that, just because of the hydrogen building up on India, we would be able to go towards a 40 billion business model.
Fantastic.
Similar models if we look at, if I just, from a model study which we have done, on a 2050 model which when we have looked at, with a forecasting what we are seeing with the different sources which we are able to do, we would be able to make the cost effectiveness down to 48%, less than what we are paying today. So these are very concrete examples. For that, we need also good ecosystem players to work together. And as Madam Preeta was mentioning, financial models are very important here. They need to play a very important role here also to support this transition. And also then mechanisms which will be able to support industry payments, support the DISCOM payments, all that also need to be there in place in the big picture to conclude. So the transition does not come by itself, but together we can make it, and that will be very effective.
Together we can make it. I think that's a great point. Tejasri, any quick remarks?
I think to take the cue from Mr. Venkatesh in terms of ecosystem building, I think that's where we all need to focus on. If you look at probably large corporates, the last decade was looking within the fence and seeing how good you can do in terms of your managing your own footprint. The next decade is looking at the entire ecosystem or the value chains. And that's where, you know, the whole, the suppliers and the vendors and the partners come into picture, the MSMEs.
Whole game has to be integrated. And
It needs to be an integrated game because you are not the lone player and you cannot survive as a lone entity.
Great.
You know, so the whole holistic view in terms of ecosystem building, good investments in innovations or startups who are actually giving these solutions to you as to move on the sustainability path is very essential, both as corporates as well as investors. And looking at the whole, you know, the big picture.
Big picture is important. Wonderful. Quick, any comments, Preeta?
I think I'll just add that it's an ecosystem, and I'll just sort of end with an example, right? And that we need to see more of that in India. Walmart, for example, you know, Walmart is a, you know, we work closely with Walmart and the likes of them on the supply chain, giving our reports. But Walmart has come up with I think, a program called Gigatron. Right, for their entire supply chain, they picked up and they have taken a target for reducing emissions, X percentage of emissions, and they've tied up with a bank, saying, with a subsidized, slightly lower interest rate, saying that we will help our supply chain become more ESG compliant, right, and you know, help them by a certain date. So this is the kind of partnership we need to see in our country too, with different stakeholders.
To be able to make that happen. Perfect. I think, you know, G20s contribute about 60 to 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. We need funding from the developed world to subsidize the climate disasters, to bring in the technology. The carbon budget is already consumed. If everybody was still to fulfill all their NDCs, which has not happened, which is unlikely to happen, we would still end up at 1.7 degrees centigrade. That is overshooting already the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal. But now the hope is to keep the temperature rise less than 2 degrees centigrade. That's what the framework United Nations is working on. In conclusion, net zero is extremely important. We need to play an inclusive game. Technology has a big role to play. Right regulations, right policy, ecosystem, energy transition are some of the words that easily find interlaced into this path of net journey. We all have our priorities right. There is no reason to believe that we will not succeed into this game. Thank you, wonderful. I think we have about 5 minutes. We can take any questions from the panel. Yes, please. Yeah, speak up. We can hear. Yeah.
Good evening. I am Professor Srinivas Shikaripurkar. I am from academia. I represent SP Jain School of Global Management.
Okay.
My question to all the panelists is, you know, we have 100-year plus company members here. I'm very curious to know about any use cases in your value chain partners where you have helped them to, you know, create a net zero plan.
You know, there will be so many cases. I think she gave one as an Amazon example. We can perhaps take that as an offline.
Yeah.
But I think Tejasri, I'm sure, has answer. But in the interest of time, perhaps we can take that offline. You just give him, there are cases.
Yes, I think, the morning session, there was a mention on Godrej, one of our SME being aspiring for a net zero, that we did through a cluster development program, transitioning the cluster towards sustainability through Green Co certifications, which CII facilitates. And that's how we've been, and there are many cases, that's one example, like who is now exporting because of the transition.
I'm sure.
I just want to add one here. So we are, for SMEs, they don't know how to put the data together, right? So we are currently just doing the base level. We are putting the data together, coming out with scores on where they are on ESG and what are they weak on ESG so that they can then work on steps.
Thank you.
And maybe I can also comment that we are supporting our customers in this journey to how to build their net zero direction, So as I said, that ecosystem and the elements, we are also helping them to map them, and that is a study model.
It's a collective responsibility we all talk, but we will talk about offline. Sorry about that, but for the interest of time. Any other questions from the participants? No?
I don't have a question, but it is more of a suggestion.
Sure.
Shouldn't the government of India and CII come with a tool which would help the SMEs to measure their carbon footprint and also to address such things, right?
So if I may add, CII, if you go to the CII website, it helps you measure your carbon footprint. They worked on some tools. So actually tools are there. There are all free tools. It's about what data do you put in, right? I think that it is more of a basic level. Secondly, if you know your carbon footprint, what will you do with it? Exactly. Right? I think it's a question of taking them, okay, this is where you are. Now, if your footprint is X, how do you reduce it further? And then when you do it, what is the opportunity for you? So I think we need to navigate that entire thing, and that's why I think this connecting the dots, right, becomes very important.
Because I have interacted with a lot of SMEs, so they are aware sometimes about carbon, becoming carbon neutral, becoming net zero compliant. But what happens is that they say that all the top players or the larger players, they're squeezing them for margins. They're working on wafer thin margins. So from where would they,
I mean, that's a great point. And, and that's a reality of life. But it's not only the MSMEs that need to know their carbon footprint. Even the big companies need to know them. Anything that gets measured gets managed. And I think that's where Tejasri was talking about the need for standardization, the need for being transparent with it, and realizing that all these pledges are becoming more of announcement. I think at the United Nations level, they are institutionalizing a process by which we know who are fulfilling those commitments. And we all should be proud that amongst the G20 nations, India is the only nation which is on track with its Paris climate change commitments. And in fact, we are bettering them. In fact, after the NDCs were signed in Paris Climate Summit, after the Glasgow Summit, we revised them upwardly in Egypt Summit. And whereas many nations are not keeping it. So they are trying to find out a way to get this along.
So just to add, believe me, not only the MSMEs, but the large corporates also get squeezed on
sure.
margins. And I'm sure everybody will echo that. What has happened is the expectation that a green product or a sustainable service should draw premium. We need to get out of that mindset. It's not going to happen. This is our experience over the last decade. We need to reconcile to the fact that it is a USP you are building while competing on cost. Then you get the preferential buying option or selling option, but you need to still compete on cost. What it is helping you is actually reducing your expenses in terms of fixed cost. If you really look at energy, let's not talk about net zero or energy efficiency. What is it doing? It's saving you your money in terms of energy bills. That's the reality we need to communicate to smaller.
So it's a short-term pain for long-term gain. We said that ESG is akin to ECG. What is ECG to human health? ESG is to the corporate health. The times are not very far. I think on that note, I would like to thank all the panelists. There is one more last question, quickly.
if we cut by 2050, so our investment go up to like $13.5 trillion. So again, it is enhancing our GDP 4.7 and as well as the 50 million jobs also. Then how about our, in this entire transition mechanism, how our policy, is it changing? Otherwise, how our we are ready? Is there any concrete solution? Otherwise, any early warning roadmap for this entire
policy? As in which policy?
Energy policy. Otherwise, transitional technological policy. About
I think okay, Venkatesh, you want to take that?
Maybe I can try answering that. I think I understood your question. See, we have embarked on a journey. Yeah. Whether it is 2070, 2050, 2045, whatever we have to have different milestones. Energy industry could look at 2045 as net zero. But as a country, we need to look at also other industries which are connecting towards it. In this journey, what we have embarked on, if we are able to advance, what we have seen is that the more faster we are able to go, the more benefits we are seeing. I indicated to you a 2050 study which we did on, and then we are able to get a 48% reduction on it. If we are able to squeeze that by 10 years, the benefit will reach us 10 years before. So there is clearly an indication, and as Ravindraji was mentioning, many of our targets which we have put for 2030, we are achieving in these years. And believe me, and you all will also see it, experience it, next 2 to 3 years are golden years, which will be very important on policy, on actions, on implementation, which we are doing very well, which we need to keep continuing, will give us benefit for 10, 20, 30 years to come.
Yes. So I think, the quick answer, I can see him taking charge, but the quick answer here is execution is everything. Prime Minister outlaid the Panchamrit agenda in COP Glasgow Summit. We are progressing. We laid out the green growth for the Amrut Kal, so which is what we are doing on that roadmap for net zero transition, energy transition. So the matter now is to stay on course and deploy technology to accelerate this energy transition. That's just about it. But again, once again, I want to thank my co-panelists for all the insights. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks for all the patient listening, and look forward to engaging with you subsequently.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Requesting all the panelists to please stand for a picture. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists, Ravindra sir, Preeta ma'am, Tejashree ma'am, Venkatesh sir, for your wonderful insights on focus on net zero. A big thank you to our partners, Tubisex, Platinum Partner, NRES plus Hauser, Associate Partner, and a big thank you to all the delegates for joining us today. Thank you. We close the session.